Hello, and welcome to PSU's transportation seminar. My name is Leming Wang, and I will be introducing and moderating today's seminar. Our Friday transportation seminars have been a tradition since the year 2000, and the seminars are usually held live on Portland State University's urban campus, located on the ancestral homelands of the Monoma, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tumwater, Walala, bands of the Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, and many other indigenous nations of the Columbia River. It is important to acknowledge that we are here because of the sacrifices forced on those of the indigenous ancestors of this place, remember these communities, and to honor their legacies, lives, and destinies. Today, we're very pleased to have Tara Weidner presenting on Transportation Decarbonization, a state perspective. Tara supports ODOT, Oregon DOT's Climate Office in a variety of data and analysis effort related to greenhouse gas scenario planning and targets, adding a climate lens to state funding decisions and other climate actions in coordinate with a broad mix of state and local partners. She has over 25 years of public and private experience in modeling and analysis of multimodal transportation systems. Her career has focused on quantifying the complex interactions of transportation, land use, and the environment. She holds bachelor's and master's degree in civil engineering from Purdue University and University of California, Berkeley, and she is a registered professional engineer. Here's a preview of next week's seminar. Find this information on our website as well. And a overview for today's seminar. You can expect our speakers to present for about 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A. You will be receiving questions through the Q&A features on your Zoom control panel, and I will ask them at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time for all your questions, we will give our speakers the opportunity to email written response for any questions left unanswered. We will have enabled closed captions, but you must click on the CC button, CC feature to view them. We'll be recording today's seminar. It will be available on our website later today, along with presentation slides. If you're tracking professional development hours, the seminar is eligible for 1 hour of continuing education credit. With that, I will hand it over to Tara.
Great, thanks a lot. Thank you. Good, well, it's exciting to see so many people in person as well as possibly online. Thank you for coming, despite the rain. Happy to be here. I think I spoke when I first started ODOT about 10 years ago about some bike analysis methods. So happy to come back and speak now that I'm in the climate office and sort of this broader sort of urgent need that's in front of us. It's showing them. Yeah. I guess I can start and talk a little bit about myself. So I'm Tara Weidner, and I'm with the Oregon Climate Office, and my position is Climate Impact Analysis Lead. So I do a lot of the data work within that unit. There we go. All right, so if you're here and listening, you may not need to know this, but certainly there is a why here. Decarbonization is causing climate change. We're seeing it all over. We're seeing it in the news across the US, definitely this week. And we're seeing it, you know, in underserved communities more than anything. And we're seeing it on our own infrastructure at ODOT as well. And so that's a big thing that we're actually trying to steal our infrastructure to be ready for that while we actually decarbonize. The climate office itself, I think we're been a pioneer here in the US of doing some things, at the front of the pack in terms of climate change. And so we're one of the first climate offices at a DOT. We do these 4 things that are noted here. 3 of them relate to decarbonization. I'll talk quite a bit about today. And the 4th one over here is, planning for the climate change on our assets and so forth. And it all kind of starts with this strategy, the statewide transportation strategy I'll talk a lot about today. So we've had a long history here, and it's been a lot of, milestones along the way and some course corrections as well. So I think it all starts back when the legislature said, hey, we need to reduce greenhouse gas by 75% from 1990 to 2050. From that, we actually created some models now called the Vision of L model. A key point was this strategy, the statewide transportation strategy. I'll refer to it the STS a lot. And that's our roadmap to get there. And then we've started monitoring to it, and we've had some course corrections. Another key action after the first course correction was Governor Kate Brown came out with an executive order that said, hey, push that STS a little bit more, and all you agencies get together and do that. So that has really done a lot of work since 2020, or impetus for a lot of work in 2020. And I've been here through a lot of that. So I'll give you a sort of a history perspective of all that's gone on. So what's important is transportation is, one of several sectors with that legislative ask of 75%. All the sectors are taking that. It's been a little stubborn for transportation to bring that down. We're about a third, 35% of those emissions for the state. And so we need to really bring those down. The other thing I'll mention is we're trying to follow the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in terms of setting those targets, but those are evolving over time as we try to make that 1.5%, 2%. So, it's the numbers are changing. Our strategy is still the same. And so, we need to respond to those, but at the same point, just maybe make change and not just chase targets, spend our time changing those. Okay, so I'm going to start with talking about a lot of pieces that get put together here at the state level. So the legislature says you must do this. So we went about and created this first statewide strategy back in 2013, which is our roadmap to do that. But then there's policy things, there's studies that we do and roadmaps, there's regulations that come in to help here. And then at the end of the day, there's funding that we do for investments and programs, and at both at the state and the local level, and even transit service here, it gets involved. So lots of moving parts here. And I'll say first we had that, roadmap. And then in 2023, that was solidified in our long range plan and set some goals there for us. And then the 5-year plan that falls out of that really implements it. And what are we doing in those next few years? So I'll set that policy context first. I first want to go back to that statewide transportation strategy, our roadmap. It is so important to us. It is this handshake of how we're going to get there and what categories of things we need to do. And as we evolve, those things slightly change a little bit, but this is sort of the North Star in everything, and it's very foundational. So what we did is when we said, hey, you need to reduce by 75%, we got a bunch of people together and we had this new model that we framed a conversation with them, a scenario planning conversation, said, what will it take for us to get there? So people came in with, hey, if we do all this stuff in the urban area, if we just do the fuel and vehicle technology. And so all those we ran them by themselves and they didn't get to the 75%. So then we put them together, they still didn't get there. So there was a lot of back and forth about what's plausible here. How much can we handle? How much VMT reduction can we take? Can we price people? That's going to be tough. So what is that trade-off? And I think, so this is really a handshake that we made after 2 years of what combination of things that we were going to do. So you just don't open this lightly. And I think it's a really strong foundation for us to do a lot of the work we do. Out of that handshake, which was sort of a single scenario in that model, the Vision of L model, that's our vision scenario, we can pull out the pieces that are in the metropolitan areas. So that's what we did almost immediately, even before the report was done. So in 2011, we set up some targets for our metropolitan areas. So these are the 8 larger metropolitan areas, and they have targets. In the model, we could say, hey, there's things that are led by state Like we need to clean up the vehicles and fuels. So those are regulations at state or even federal levels. And then there's things that locals really need to do, which involves zoning and land use and investing in more on local streets. So we were trying to separate between what state does, state actions and local actions. And so as we set this target, we said the local actions really are to reduce VMT. So these targets that are set here, even though they're for the greenhouse gas and are part of this whole plan, they're household VMT per capita reductions that they're trying to meet. So that was a while ago. So this is 10 years later. We really solidified that in our policy document, which is this 10-year plan. Thanks to Adam for running that through in the last couple of years. That solidified all that stuff, good stuff that was in that plan back in 2013. Some key things that came out of that is that all of our transportation decisions in the agency now go through 3 lenses, and climate is one of those, along with equity and safety. The second thing it really did is to set some targets for us. It's not just a greenhouse gas target, it's breaking it down into, hey, reduce the miles that we travel in vehicles and clean up those vehicles. And those numbers for those targets are, again, coming out of that one vision scenario, the STS. So the strategic action plan here is what our commission does to say, okay, we had those big long range goals. What are we going to do that's actionable in the next 5 years? And so this strategic action plan is important with our commission conversations and what we signed up for. The climate part of that I've listed here. And you can see that we need to deploy EV chargers. We need to put a climate lens on the funding that we do. The third and fifth one there talk about ODOT's footprint. So we have buildings and fleet ourselves, but almost more important, we found out, is the construction materials. When we build infrastructure, we have to have steel and concrete, and those things have a greenhouse gas footprint. It's much smaller than the vehicles going across them, but it's something we can directly control. And then lastly here is, I think is really important, is we need to develop a passenger vehicle per capita reduction strategy. So a strategy, how are we going to do this over the next few years of what ODOT can do to push that initiative forward. And there's some metrics that will keep us accountable. The other thing is, Climate Office can't do this alone. This is definitely a partnership. Even within ODOT, we are not a shop that actually delivers the bike lanes or those things. We are a policy group that helps to set some strategy and work with others to make change within the agency. So clearly that's just inside, but then we have outside, we have our sister state agencies, we have local agencies, there's transit agencies. So this is definitely a collaboration. And that was recognized in that executive order in 2020 by the governor. And she said, hey, get together and with our sister state agencies, so those are all listed down here, and push that strategy, the statewide transportation strategy, forward. So since 2020, we've had 2-year work plans. We're on our second one right now, and probably another one coming up next. So what are some of these actions that are going on that fall out of this? The first thing is on the vehicles and fuel side, lots of action since that 2020. A lot of these things have come into play. And so we'll start over on the left with sort of the vehicles themselves. So there's an advanced clean cars and on the truck side, an advanced clean trucks regulation. So they're going to say what is sold within the state at different years. We're back, sort of. Yeah. There we go. So the regulations have really been important to so we're part of a group of about 10, maybe 12 states that are tied with California, which is an exception in the Clean Air Act. And so we're able to have more ambitious regulations on the vehicle manufacturers than the federal CAFE standard as a whole. So there's sort of this national standards for most states, and then they can opt in and do what California is doing. So we're doing that. So these kind of parallel what's happening in California. And then the fuel, whether that is liquid fuel. Okay, thank you. Whether that's liquid fuel or electricity, we need to clean those up. So definitely some really big things have happened there. And then kind of more on the sort of policy and programs area, there's been incentives that have become available to people for purchasing. And I'm really excited that some of the state money is going towards what we call a charge ahead program, which is for lower income, and it is more of a used market for EVs. So that's a little unique across the US. And then, of course, we have to have chargers out there. And for fleets, they're not quite into EVs and they may go hydro, right? So we're looking at alternative fuel corridors for them. Okay, and so one thing that I know is hitting us front and center right now is the electrification. So lots of money coming from the federal level to get the EV charges out there. I've got 100 million up there. I'm not even sure it includes that bottom bullet, which is the medium and heavy duty charging grants we did with our sister states. We're looking at needing to like increase by 5-fold the chargers that are out there. We know that about 80% of charging is going to occur at home. So, but you know, we all need to go a little further than maybe the 250 miles, and we need to make sure that there is that charger available to us and that it's working. We actually have some broken charger fixing programs as well. And so we have to do that for light duty vehicles. We have to, you know, look at the medium and heavy. There's this growing e-commerce because we're all buying things online. So that is ballooning that kind of vehicle travel. So trying to get fleets there. And then we also are trying to put 110 volt outlets for the e-bike revolution. We hope to be happening here that could substitute for all those vehicle models. And trying to do this in a way, I think the state support and some of the federal money, you know, because a lot of these gas stations are private, right? Why should you have an EV charger not be a privately funded? Well, a lot of them will be private, but where the state comes in is to really help and make that equitable. And the places where private industry will not invest, whether that's retooling your multifamily home, you know, so you in your apartment building, you have something at the bottom, or, you know, in an underserved area that maybe private industry wouldn't go there first. We're going to help to make that a more equitable transition. So the other key thing when we got this executive order is we said, hey, people don't know about our strategy. They're, you know, I kept repeating the things in it. And so instead of having a book on the shelf that people weren't reading, we moved that into a website, which is more transparent. We're more accountable to it. And so this is, you know, kind of what we have. So I invite you to go there. Hopefully I have that there. And so this is that one, you know, scenario too. There's a lot of text here that describes it, but for me as a numbers person, the charts are really my job. And so what we've done here is we've taken that one scenario, which the gold scenario is our vision. That's where we want to be. The blue scenarios are where we have been or where we are. So dotted was 5 years ago. The solid blue line is where we're at today. You can see we're moving in the right direction. And you start out with all the conversation is about greenhouse gas, which I don't know what's high, what's low in million metric tons. We've broken it now into 2 objectives that we need to reduce the growth in vehicle miles traveled. And if you're driving, we need to clean up those vehicle miles, grams per mile. So you can see the dotted to dash, we're really making the gains in the last 5 years on this side, cleaning up the vehicle miles. And we still have a lot to do on the reducing our growth in vehicles miles traveled. And I want to say that it's reducing the growth because we see more people coming in. And so we just need to dampen our own footprint so that as more people come in, it doesn't grow as fast. That's what the strategy allowed us to do. We don't actually have to absolutely reduce as long as we clean up, which it looks like we're getting on track to do. So this in the model is going back to the vehicles and fuels and how we've modeled it. So we're looking forward what's on the road in these timeframes on the bottom, and it's comparing Oregon and those exception places with the federal CAFE standards on the left. So you can see the passenger vehicles, the green is the electric vehicle, so we'll be over 60% hopefully by 2050. If you add in the gas hybrids, we'll be pretty close to 90 or 100%. That's on passenger vehicles, much slower on the heavy duty trucks. And in fact, federally, there's not a whole lot going on. So our advanced clean trucks rule is really allowing us to get in that 20 to 30 range of electrics and maybe half when we add the hybrids in. So we'll see where that goes, but that's definitely a lag there. And up in the corner, I've noted of all the greenhouse gas in the transportation sector, passenger vehicles is pretty big, right? It's over 50%, but that truck amount is pretty big as well. And if you're a travel data person, you might know that most of the on most of our roads, it's about 10% trucks, but this is a 30% number really. So they're 3 times the emission rates of a passenger car right now. So we really need to clean those up. And in fact, in Europe, I think they've shrunk the passenger vehicle side and it's about the same size or surpassed by the heavy trucks. So important for us to keep that. And then of course, we also can't forget, and we're not doing a whole lot about, is the air travel. Well, I shouldn't say we're not doing a lot about it. We are trying to clean up, but it's a much harder sector to clean up. All right, so that was all mostly on the vehicles and fuel side. I think it's really important to talk about reducing our vehicle miles traveled. This is a strategy that we're coming up with. So we're resting it on 4 categories of that strategy that we're pulling out that really integrate with each other to get us to those reduction goals. And I put the state up here because so far, a lot of this work has been just in the urban areas and we focused on their targets and so forth, but we really need to talk about the broader state. And I think it's different in those areas and we haven't really done that yet. So that's part of this strategy. And then just talking about these pieces a little bit, pricing is critical. And I know nobody wants to hear about pricing. And pricing is often, per mile. We're just not even paying for the system. And as we get to electric vehicles and we're not even buying gas anymore, the revenues are really going down. And so we need to shift to that per mile. And we have an opportunity here in the legislature right now because we're talking about how unstable that funding is. So if we can move that to a per mile, us travel modelers know that, people react to that. They dust off their bike and they think twice. So it's really important we do that. But when we do, we have to have those alternative systems available. So that's where the improved transportation option comes in. Have those transit service, have the bike and ped, and even to the point of incentives to help you do that. Try that out during the construction period. Try that out with your friend. Have a free pass or something to do that. So that's really important. And then when trips are shorter, then you're more likely to do that, right? And an e-bike and so forth can help you shorten those trips. But our land use is so important here. And this is an ace we have in Oregon because we have these land use laws that are intended to keep us, with those destinations close and not be dependent on an auto to get to the library, to get to the store. So need to push on those. And we're trying to have more mixed use areas. There's a focus that I'll talk about later that has that. We also need to reduce our growth in road miles. We have a pretty established system. We got some bottlenecks we need to work out. We have, we're hotspots in the US for a couple freight routes here that we need to handle. But if we can do that with pricing to keep any induced demand down, other things that happen in this sector might be road diets to really help the walking and biking, facilitate that within the areas. So lots of interacting things here. Okay, so when we think about that strategy, what do we have in our policy pocket to make that happen? Well, we know that the strategy in the middle here has both state actions and things that regions can do. And those regions are really consisting of a lot of cities that can do the kind of things that we're talking about there. So when this was first put together with those targets for those urban areas, Metro immediately and was asked by the rule to go ahead. And so that climate smart strategy, if you're aware of that, really came out of that. But the other metropolitan areas were not. They were voluntary. A couple of them signed up for it, but we just really didn't see a lot of action following through with some of those plans. So which leads me to this policy. So in 2022, we passed the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities rule. And that rule had all of these elements in it. The first one on the left is that same scenario planning, that climate smart strategy type of thing that is now needing to be done in other areas. So at the end of the day, all of our 8 metropolitan areas will have a path to their target, and they will have translated that path into performance measures that they'll track. Great. So they'll translate into performance. So we'll have, some kind of path and be able to measure against our path, even if we're falling behind, because I think there's only so much teeth you can put into those items. And that actually, this whole thing is really regulated by the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and it ties back into our land use laws and whether you can grow your urban growth boundary. So these are the kind of strings they can put on on these communities if they're not maybe meeting some of the targets that are set for them. So once you have a plan, then you're trying to make that happen. And some of the good things that came with this rule in the second two items are really trying to prepare us for people living in mixed use neighborhoods. So you have that short distance so that we focus our transit and we start building the infrastructure, build as if people will come, and then they will come, right? So if we invest in those areas as if they're going to house 30% of our urban households within an area that has shorter trips, has good access to transit and all that. So the preparation was really to make sure the zoning would allow that kind of thing. And really some parking reforms that I think if you've read Donald Shoup's book, we need to really get rid of some of those minimum parking things that enables people to drive everywhere and also makes it more expensive to build the kind of housing we want. So those are some really important things that have happened there that are moving forward in each of the 8 communities. And then at the end of the day, this is a cycle here. We in each of those regions, they do long range plans and they report on them. They have some engagement. They come up with a project list and then they do it again 4 years hence. So this process, this cycle is ongoing and it's really up the game on reaching out to some of our underserved areas in that engagement. And it's really put some gates or some relooks at some of the things that are on the project list. And particularly in those, what we're calling climate friendly areas, those mixed use neighborhoods, maybe enabling more, gosh, I'm losing my, strike 3.
This is new.
Sorry, no worries. You were pretty quick at getting it back.
Is it not coming back? Oh.
There we go. And so I think, some of the hooks that are on those project lists are, scrutiny on the capacity expanding projects, right? We know those are a little bit troublesome. Are they still a good solution? And looking at those, they often call these 830 projects. And we're also looking at some metrics over here. They'll be measuring the VMT per capita, the vehicle miles traveled of the residents with the plan. So put the project lists in the model and see where you're at in your future year relative to your base year. And so there'll be some checks on that for a conforming plan. All right, jumping to another topic. I think I mentioned this earlier. ODOT has a footprint of what we pay for and what we do with our employees and so forth. And it's in about 2021, we did a greenhouse gas inventory of our operations. And so some of the recommendations that came out of that are to reduce our greenhouse gas from our construction and maintenance operations, fuels and materials when we build those investments. And then some of the other recommendations are just, renewable diesel where we can in maintenance, some offsets. And then what's really interesting here, I don't know if you've heard about these environmental product declarations, EPDs. They're kind of like a nutrition label that you put on your steel or on your cement, and it says how much greenhouse gas emissions took it to, get to your doorstep. They found in the building industry that just by sheer reporting on these, people will clean up and say, well, why would I buy that one if this is the same price and it has a better? So just the legislature in House Bill 4139 asked us to create a program for that. So they, in other states, they've gone further and said, hey, we're going to start to decline what we're allowing in terms of the global warming potential of the material. So that's something more in California. Right now, we're just being asked to report on it. All right, and then next one here. Maybe you can help me with that. Okay. Jumping into a new topic here, like for us to be accountable to all these things I talked about, follow the money. So here where I'm trying to talk about being accountable. What are we spending our money on? The first thing that you can see that we're spending money on is particular grants that are focused on things that we know are good for climate. So the federal IIJA, bipartisan infrastructure law, really created some new programs, one of which is called the Carbon Reduction Program. And so it has a lot of funding, and it can be anything from, EV chargers and maybe some freight improvements that help greenhouse gas and so forth, to bike lanes. These other programs down here, much more focused on things that you'll see day to day in your life. Safe Routes to School has been around a long time. The Great Street program has been a real success. In fact, I went to the legislature to try to ask for a lot more money for that program, because I think the backlog of asks on that was great, 3 times what we had or something. And then we're really excited that there's a new program here, the Innovative Mobility Program. And that was really, I think, set aside by our Commissioner Simpson, who pushed this out of some state funds. And it's a new program aimed to improve historically underserved communities and their access to public and active transportation. So we're doing good work with some particular focus programs, but then there's so many other programs that are just part of ODOT's business. And so this is where the governor asked us specifically to look at what's called the STIP. That's the Statewide Transportation Improvement Plan. Every time we get federal money, which is on most projects, whether it's us or local agencies, it goes through this STIP process. And so we were asked to do this. I knew nothing really about the STIP, and I went from 0 to 60 on a super complex program that's mission critical, needing to get money out to do all these things. The first thing we had to do was learn enough about it to say, where can we poke in here and have some influence? So what decision points do we want to have a climate lens on? And so we chose 3 spots. The first one is when there's some discretionary money. A lot of money might be earmarked to safety or earmarked to bridges. But there's some discretionary money. And so what are you going to do with that? And try to create a scenario planning process with our agency. And in fact, I think that was one of the most successful things we did, was we got a historical amount, $100 million more dollars went to biped programs, and went from an opportunistic, yeah, can you add a bike lane to your project, please, to, hey, these are the corridors we want to invest in where we think the need is greatest. So we got to a strategic biped program by flooding the biped program with a lot of money that they had to figure out what to do with. The second place that we wanted to come in is once the money is set, it's can you make that more climate friendly? So if you're already doing a project, hey, can you add a resilience project, or the culvert a little bit bigger to accommodate that on the adaptation side? Or hey, can you make the walk to transit a little bit better in something that you're already doing? So how do we make that money a little bit better? Then the third thing is just accounting for it. At the end of the day, projects were chosen and there's an impact to that greenhouse gas. And so that's the third place that we tried to.
Second 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And so this is one of 2 things I'll share in terms of that accountability. So again, we're trying to put a climate lens on just this 3-year program. We're focusing really on what ODOT has control of. So there's a lot of programs in there that we pass money down to locals, but we're focusing on what ODOT has control of, and identifying and invest. So of the, it's like what, $3 billion in here. That's maybe 1,000 projects or so. Each project would break up into, maybe it has a piece that has a bike lane on it. Maybe it has a piece that's more just basic paving that's neutral. And maybe they're, like making the crossing distance bigger because they're putting 2 left turn lanes in here in an urban area, and that might turn it red. So we actually looked at what they're buying with that money and then broke it out into these pieces. We're going to try to track over time how that plays out. The other thing in here is that some of this money is in construction. So that's the darker shading, and some of it is still in planning. So we need to have some continued money to move those plannings into construction. And then the other piece that we've been sharing in our accountability is when we take just the construction projects, because they have enough detail that we can actually put them into a travel model and go through the exercise of figuring out the greenhouse gas. What is the impact of those? So there's about 200 projects in that last STIP cycle that we actually went through that modeling exercise. And together, the vehicle miles traveled in those areas, the change from the project was that minus 0.52. We know that we construct these things and they take materials that have greenhouse gas embedded in them. So we've got the embodied emissions, which is positive. That net is going in the right direction by a small amount. But then we said, who knows what 1/3 of a million metric ton means? How does that fit relative to our goals. So we went back to our website where we have this chart and we said, well, we're trying to get to the gold. We're at the blue. So we got that gap in there. We added it up for all of those years and said that's 73. This also is added up over the life of those projects. So we could say 0.37 divided by the 73, it's about 0.5% of that whole gap that we have. So small, right direction, and like to keep moving in that direction. Right. Okay, so at the end of the day, I've talked about a lot of things here, and people come to me and ask why this project showed up. Why? Where did it have any scrutiny? And so we created charts to tell people about the planning process. So where the climate touch points are in that process. This is something we call our storm diagram because of the initials of STORM. So we start with strategic and initiatives are coming out of the top here, the imperative to do that, whether that's federal imperative or the legislature. And then strategically, we know we have that statewide transportation strategy. It's now in the Oregon Transportation Plan. Tactically is when we choose like which projects. And so that's where we have that climate friendly and equitable communities rule that sets our long range plans in the urban areas. On the state side, we have that climate lens on the STIP because it's also funding those. Then you get down to operational and delivering. So you might be in a NEPA project or something. So we've done this for quite some time, having some environmental review of projects and including greenhouse gas. And then we need to report and monitor. And I think we're really beefing up this area of performance measures in the urban areas and at the state level to sort of track our progress and how we're doing on those. What you're seeing here is green, which is a lot of what we talked about today. And the yellow is on that other side where we're planning for a changed climate and stealing our infrastructure to do that and being more resilient. So both of those are mixed in here. All right, so we know we're not there yet, even with the plans we've projected. So how do we close that gap? And I've identified a number of things here, both on reducing VMT and on vehicles and fuels. And I've tried to distinguish because, systemic change is really, key to getting to where we need to go. But I keep finding that if we put a bike lane out there and nobody uses it, or if we put some EV charger or an EV incentive program for you to buy it and nobody uses it, if we do systemic change and it's not backed with private action, whether it's by personal people and their choices and their investments, or by firms, because firms invest in fleets of vehicles, they locate in areas that may have more or less travel requirements. We really need to have both of these. So I'm kind of close here with that combination of how to close the gap. So certainly we have projects and programs that we can do, whether those are the bike and walk networks or transit or demand management to encourage you to do that. But we need people to choose those modes, whether that's carpool or the options I just mentioned. We need to manage our road growth. And part of that is if you have to drive, don't avoid non-peaks, because that's where we size our facilities is where the peaks are. So if those peaks don't happen, we have some extra capacity on the non-peak time periods. And limit your next day delivery, right? Because that means they have to go right now and they can't economize and put things together. We need to put some low carbon construction and maintenance materials into our facilities as well. Mixed use neighborhood. So we're really trying to do that. I know the governor has this big push. And in fact, some of our candidates for president are talking about housing, where are we going to put this? If we put that on the edge of the area, we are going to be fighting that from a climate perspective because they all have to drive in to get to jobs and so forth. Can we put them in these mixed use areas that we're intending, these climate friendly areas that we're intending to mix use and be walkable and you don't have to drive as much? And so we want both firms to minimize their travel distance when they locate as well as people. Pricing. So we know that a big part of reducing that VMT and also sustaining a transportation system in general is to change the pricing system and really, going to that per mile road user charge. I think there was a 2021 here in the Portland area. It's called POEM. It's the pricing options for equitable mobility. Really talked about that the most equitable of the options is that per mile pricing where we're all paying a lot of us, right, are paying a small amount, whereas if you do tolling, it's a few people of the total that are on those tolled facilities. And we're really only talking about tolling largely for the Portland area because of the demands and the congestion here. So really, we need people to support those sticks as well as the carrots. And sometimes we might price things for externalities. So we might be changing the registration fees to look at, gas vehicles or even larger vehicles, right? We're buying a lot of SUVs. That's working against our climate goals. So if we disincentivize that by having a higher price there, that can help. And so we need everybody to, hold their nose and kind of do these things for us to get to those goals. We've now, I think, a game changer in terms of our planning. So we talked about that CFEC rule, the climate friendly and equitable rule. And we need new planners. So you guys are a lot of planners. We need you to really come here and exercise that potential over the next few years. It enables it, but it doesn't require a lot of things. So we need people to come in and have the great ideas of how we can, implement this and play it out in those communities. And if you're not a planner even, you can show up at public meetings, talk to your legislature and so forth about some of these items and how important it is. On the vehicles and fuel side, I think we're doing a lot on, regulating these vehicles and what's being sold in the state and trying to put in that infrastructure. But we need, people to actually choose that, whether that's a firm or a business, that the next vehicle you choose, talk to your neighbors, your friends, even if it's a gas hybrid, that, cuts it down from 22 miles per gallon to like 50, right? That is a huge jump right there. It will save them money. But even better if you can go to electric or a plug-in electric, or even better, an e-bike. Skip that altogether. That's what I hope to do. I'm going to hold my 2008 car for a while longer and buy an e-bike. That's the plan we worked out, my husband and I. So anyway, so that's things we can do. And then we're in the state trying to assist transit agencies to go electric and use the renewable diesel and so forth. Huge benefits for health because we know those buses are running on the streets right next to us every day. So trying to do that and then have some incentives to help that happen. So we need people probably more on the heavy duty side here to start switching to some of those low carbon fuels. So with that, kind of closing here, this is our website. Lots of information, as you can see, available to you to learn more about what we do. I think there's probably an email that you can just send to Climate in General. So and then there we have it, trying to save this beautiful earth that we have. So that's about it. I did want to say one more thing, which is, committing to a career in climate change is super important, I think. And so I'd like to encourage any students here to do that. It's both humbling and because there's really a lot to do, but also hopeful. I mean, every day you're seeing these results. And you're seeing what's possible. And, if we work together, it is really possible. So trying to make that happen, I think is helps you with the sort of angst that comes with the problems that are ahead of us. I should say that ODOT is going to be hiring here in our analysis unit any day now for a planner 4. So I think Laming will know about that.
The ODOT's Public Transportation Division is also hiring a climate specialist.
There we go.
Job I think is listed.
Excellent. And I know our partners at Department of Environmental Quality and Energy also have some openings. And my boss said, hey, if there's anybody who's interested in mentorship, they should also get a hold of us. So those are a little bit more ad hoc. So just wanted to make sure to make that plug. Hope that you help us in this very important and endeavor. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tara. For those of you who view the webinars over Zoom, you can submit your questions, use the Q&A feature there. And of course, for those of you in the room, raise your hand if you have a question for Tara.
Ryan Seaver from BPS. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to the sort of transition from the old way of doing things to the new way of doing things. And I'll give an example. We propose to add density to an area, an inner neighborhood in Portland. And we go to PBOT and they say, well, from the VMT standpoint, this is great. But from the level of service standpoint, this is going to cause problems. And like we can get hammered on both, like we're gonna lose a LUBA appeal probably on both of those. I'm just wondering if you can speak to how that transition is sort of rolling out.
Yeah, definitely there was something specifically in this CFAC, the Climate Friendly Equitable Communities, to change what we call sort of the development review process that measures things by level of service, right? So if you have an intersection and you put some more density there, they're like, oh, of course, everybody's going to drive, which is not necessarily true, but they say that, and then it's going to blow out the intersection. So this is a problem. The level of service is going to go to it from a C passable to, something worse. So the new CFAC requirements are going to say you have to have something else besides that. You can keep that, but you have to have at least one other thing that will measure that service. And so it can be something more like, how will this be for bike and walking, right? And especially if this is a climate friendly area where we're saying that's now the focus, is to have that be the preferred mode, then you can start to play that out. So I think that directly, that one in particular will help you with that issue. It may take a while, and new planners and new blood may need to happen as well.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. My name is Gabriel Quiñones, I'm a PhD student and also a planner. I have a question. Could you speak a little more about the monitoring and implementation of the specific, great plans that were established before? Like, I wonder if your office in the climate department, are you guys in charge of making sure that these guidelines are approved, and how do you monitor them? Like, for example, I was thinking about the vehicle acquisition. You were talking about writing NODA. Like, is your department in charge of making sure that that really happens and that they are really buying the electric vehicles and switching? Because, sometimes as planners, you make plans, right, but they don't implement it. So I wonder if there's like a policy, or you're in charge of it, or there's an office specifically invested in making sure that it does happen. It's pretty bad.
Yeah, and that's challenging, right? All we're doing is sort of putting things out there, and that's where I'm coming back with that. Hey, you got to help us here, right? But so I think, we often debate this within the agency. Can we only have a performance measure on putting bike lanes out there, or can we have a performance measure on people usage of, the bike mode share? And I think we're doing a little bit of both, and it's challenging, but the way we've set up a lot of these performance measures, that they are not a lot of teeth, right? Like, there's not going to be like, hey, you cannot do this because you're not meeting your performance measure. I think what you'll end up seeing is you didn't meet it, so now you have to explain what you're going to do next cycle to redouble that. So maybe you're saying, hey, we put some stuff out there, didn't happen, now we're going to do a promotional thing. Or some other combination that is your reason for trying to reach that performance measure better in the next cycle. Right.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm an undergrad, so I feel kind of out of place here. But I'm a GIS focused person, and it sounds like what you're saying is that we're focusing in some regards getting sensors for a lot of these things that you're concerned about, in getting them out more, like having more of them so you can just have more data to be more accurate. Is that correct?
Well, not all things can we measure, right? Greenhouse gas for one, we can measure it all sectors together, right? And that's rarely done because the sensors are pretty expensive. So everything's sort of synthesized. So it starts with some data, but we have to, make the sausage of like trying to get that to a level of what we're interested in. So definitely there are more sensors. Definitely there's big data. A lot of the newer data that we're getting is, sensors in vehicles that are like catching the speeds of cars, but it's a sample, right? It's not all the people. So we still need the counts on the road maybe to tell you that. Definitely on a bike pedway, there's some laser things to sort of detect how many passengers. We're getting a lot of good data out of people touching the passenger crossing buttons, right? That's really helping us to say, where is the activity, and trying to expand that to say, what is the count of how many people are actually walking or biking? So yeah, it's a science and an art, but we're doing our best. And I guess if you set up a method and continue to try to use that same method over time, hopefully you'll be able to see trends, even if in absolute numbers, you're not right. I think what is challenging is using the big data that Apple and Replica, the Google data and so forth that is out there. this month they're getting the Candy Crush people's, locations. Next month it's something else, right? And so it changes. And so it's a little harder to get those trends over time that we're used to getting, like if you keep drawing from the same source. So there's some real challenges with that big data, some opportunities as well. And just makes us think differently about things, which change can also be hard. Trucks, medium trucks, and then passenger vehicles. So when we crunch all that, we get, X million metric tons. What if everyone was doing free flow speed? What if we were all at 50 miles per hour? And in fact, it is like 45 to 50. It's not 60 or 70. So it's a curve. You get worse on both ends. Anyway, so what if we said everyone's at ideal speed and we crunch that? And so we looked at it, and what is the difference? The change there, and we're just talking freeways now, not arterials, which are slower, was 2%. So it is a real thing. It's not everything. And so we need to treat it appropriately. So there's actually in our congestion overview report for ODOT Region 1 here, it has a chart and it shows you in some places it's like a 10% change, right? Like, because that's where the bottleneck was. Even in construction areas, we saw, over the past year that there was a change if we could go to 50 miles per hour. So, it's helpful to have some kind of order of magnitude of what that impact is. But we haven't done specifically that project probably, but something to give us some help there. Good question.
So I'm an undergraduate, and I was kind of curious about if the old batteries from the EV cars would have a positive or negative outcome from the recycling industry.
From the cycling? Recycling. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely an issue. Combustion engine have a lot of bad things in it too that, so I think you're sort of trading off things, and we're figuring out how to do the newer technology here. So a lot of people are starting to talk about the life cycle costs of vehicles and trying to incorporate that into, your analysis to say, hey, if we're driving more, then we're going to have to be buying these vehicles. I think that's a newer part of our science. And I think DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, is doing some work in that area. I know I always refer people to a Department of Energy. They do a lot of good information. They got a biennial energy report, a biennial zero emission vehicle report, and they do a lot of these like plain language discussions about various topics. And that's definitely one that gets asked a lot. And so there's some good discussion there that I could point you to if you're interested. Great.
Okay, I'll fill in. I think people online can hear us again and they're seeing you. Apologies, we don't know why our Zoom failed us, but there are still a couple questions here. One, I think is just a small clarification. On your slides about the STIP, you had those bar charts and there were non-construction activities. So could you explain how those non-construction activities contribute to reducing greenhouse gases or not? Just explain what that was.
Yeah, so some of them could directly influence that. So it might be funding of transit service, or it might be funding, actually, I think transit service is a lot in there, but it could be something more operational, TDM programs that Hope works on. They're, we're not building anything, right? So it's a program. Then there are other things in there that like we're planning to build a bike lane. So it's the plans. And so we try to say, what is the intended use of this project, and then quantify it that way. But as you notice, that bar chart is not GHG, it's dollars. How many dollars are spent to things that will be supportive of climate change or challenging climate change or just neutral?
Okay, so planning for roadways or
Yep.
bikeways would be in there.
Definitely.
And then later on, when it becomes a project, it would be in the construction part.
Right.
Okay, great. And then question, how would you say the state's experience and plans on greenhouse gas reduction will influence the legislative outreach for the upcoming session? For those of you who don't know, there's going to be a lot of talk about how we fund Oregon's transportation system in the next legislature.
Right, so what was the question about that?
How would you say that this experience that you talked about might influence the legislative outreach work for the upcoming session?
Right, and if I could characterize that, I think we're getting asked the question of like, okay, we're talking about some sustainable funding. How can we make that climate friendly? And so I would say two things. One, we're focusing this because we have to keep the lights on of the transportation system. We have to maintain the roads. That money doesn't come from the feds, it comes from the state and our gas taxes. And it's, as we said, as we electrify, that is reducing. So we need to sort of replenish that and hopefully shift to that per mile system. Nonetheless, it's like shrinking. And so we're unable to plow and plow the roads, these kind of maintenance activities. So when we do that and we start to also just, maintain our bridges and so forth, we might need to up them because it's a bigger flood range now. It's we need some guardrails that will withstand fire. So put that in there, have us retool those. And we've identified corridors across the state that are higher at risk and both have more traffic and also are more impactful to, underserved communities. So we have some priority corridors. And if you're in those, we would like to have the and, as we like to call it, you get the maintenance and operations and a resilience kind of plus up to it to make sure we're doing both at the same time. So one thing is to make sure that we have those resilience plus ups when we do the maintenance that we're asking money for. The second thing is we're asking for money. How is it going to come down? If it falls from the sky, like, hey, there's a payroll tax, hey, sales tax, I guess we don't do that here. But somehow just materializes, we won't have any behavioral response to that. And really, we need to pay for what we use on our roads. So if it doesn't show up and we're not paying for it, we won't have some of the impacts we're talking about here. So I know ODOT's letting the legislature decide how that happens, but if you ask me how to make this a climate-friendly bill, those would be my two asks.
We are at time, so thank you all for attending today's seminar. And for those who join remotely, after the seminar ends, you will have the opportunity to complete a brief survey about today's events. It will take a few minutes. I will certainly appreciate your feedback. And thank you so much, Tara, and thank you all for joining us today.